Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Our special guest is Judy Sweet, and we'll discuss the NCAA and gender equity initiatives. Judy most recently served as NCAA Senior Vice President for Championships and Education Services. During her tenure at NCAA, she served as primary contact for Title IX and gender equity initiatives. She has assisted organizations and universities with gender equity assessments and strategies and has testified on Title IX before several congressional committees. Sweet served on more than 20 NCAA committees and served as both membership president and secretary-treasurer, the first woman to serve in each of those positions with the NCAA. In conjunction with NCAA's centennial celebration in 2006, Judy was named one of the 100 most influential student athletes, and in 2007 was named by the Institute for International Sports as one of the 100 most influential sports educators in America. That's a very impressive resume. Welcome to St. Norbert College.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you've had a lifetime in athletics, and you started out at a time when women's athletics is not what it has become. When did you know that you were an athlete?
Well, I have to admit that when I was growing up, it wasn't supported or encouraged for girls to participate in sports, but I did it all my life. I can't remember a time that I didn't love participating in sports. Being a spectator, I grew up with Milwaukee Braves and the Green Bay Packers, and it doesn't get much better than that. But we never used the word athlete. At the time that I was growing up, I was labeled in not a very complimentary way as a tomboy, because girls who participated in non-traditional activities, sports, were called tomboys, not athletes. And it really wasn't until maybe the late 70s or 80s that we started hearing female sports participants referred to as athletes. And I remember a specific situation when I was director of athletics at the University of California, San Diego, sitting in the stands at a women's soccer game, and off to my left behind me was a men's soccer team, and as one of the female soccer players had a breakaway and was dashing toward the goal, I heard the soccer player say, "She's a great athlete." And that was said with admiration and respect, and I knew then that we really had changed the landscape for girls and women in sports.
Well, that was many years after you were in high school, I'm guessing.
I'm afraid it was. Yes, it was.
But you must have done something right in high school. You were valedictorian, from what I understand, at Marshall High School in Milwaukee. And at the time, did they have sports for girls there?
At that time, the opportunities for girls to participate were through what was called the GAA, the Girls Athletic Association, but it was more recreational sports. We didn't have formal coaching. We didn't have formal competition. We had what was known as sports days or play days. So if you had an interest in a particular sport, you could indicate that you wanted to go to a sports day or a play day, and someone would take you to another school, and when you got to the other school, you didn't even play with the people who came from your school. They mixed up the teams. You played the game, and then you had punch and cookies. And that was pretty much what sports was like prior to Title IX.
Wow. So what were the sports that were available then?
Well, they were typical sports, ones that we know now. There was basketball, there was volleyball, tennis, track and field. I played competitive badminton through a community league, and that's what a lot of us who had interest in sports had to do. We had to create our own opportunities. We had to find our own opportunities. A lot of those opportunities came through community programs rather than interscholastic programs, because interscholastic athletics for girls just didn't exist. And interestingly, when I was at the University of Wisconsin, which I like to think is a fairly progressive university, there wasn't an intercollegiate athletics program for girls and for women, at that time either. We had what was known as the Women's Recreation Association. They didn't even use the word sports or athletics. And it was a little bit more sophisticated than the play days and the sports days. We did go to other schools and compete with our own teammates, but we maybe had 2 or 3 competitions a year.
So you graduated from there in
a few years ago.
A few years ago, but you went into a life of sports. So I can't imagine that there could have been that many opportunities for somebody who was interested in athletics as a profession who's female, but yet you managed to do it. How did you do that?
I think I'm a good example of being in the right place at the right time. I never had envisioned that I was going to have a career in athletics. So when people would ask me, does being an athletic director or serving as NCAA president fulfill a lifelong dream? Not in my wildest dreams could I have anticipated that, given what my experiences were when I was in high school and college. I thought I was going to be a teacher, and that was the path that I was going down. And then I had an opportunity right out of college to teach physical education at Tulane University in New Orleans, and then I had an opportunity from there to teach and do graduate work at the University of Arizona. And the University of Arizona had one of the more progressive women's programs at the collegiate level, and in fact, they called their organization the Women's Athletic Association, different than Wisconsin, which was the Women's Recreation Association. And it was at that point that I continued to get more involved with the administration of athletics. And ultimately, when I wound up in San Diego and was working at the University of California, San Diego, started teaching and coaching. Then I became assistant athletic director the second year that I was there. And the third year I was there, I was appointed director of athletics at the age of 27 over a combined men's and women's athletics program. There were very few combined men's and women's athletics programs in the country, and to the best of my knowledge, all of them were being administered by a male until UCSD, to their credit, decided that they were willing to do something different.
What kind of response did the community, the alums, et cetera, give to that? And when I think about it, I think about, well, I wonder what would happen if somebody like Pat Summitt were appointed the men's coach someplace, which I have no doubt that she could do. I would imagine that had to have been kind of the same experience, right?
Fortunately, in this day and age, an appointment like Pat Summitt to be a men's basketball coach would probably be received a little bit better. I must admit that locally, my appointment was received very supportively by the campus and by the community. But it was interesting to me to find out that people throughout the country were paying attention to this. It got a lot of publicity, the first female overseeing a men's and women's athletics program. So it was national news. And I got letters from throughout the country, some of them complimentary, some of them were just head shaking like, I can't believe that people would take the time to write this kind of a letter and say the kinds of things that they were saying. Just one of the tamer ones, I was criticized for taking the job away from a man who really should be in that kind of position. And my place should have been in the kitchen. So it was quite eye-opening.
Wow. Well, if you read the comments sections of any U.S. newspaper, you realize that the nut jobs are out there, but that I can't imagine that was very uplifting to be getting that kind of response from people. But yet, the programs that you put together there were very impressive. I mean, when I was reading about you for this program, just tons of championships, and you even won the Sears Cup one year, right? And tell us about what the Sears Cup is.
Well, first of all, UCSD initially was not very competitive, but through the years we were able to attract outstanding coaches and outstanding student athletes. And I think the reason that we were successful was because it was a great academic institution. La Jolla's not too shabby of a place to go to college overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And we had a broad-based athletic program, which is consistent with what the Division III philosophy is. And that's what I really believe in. That's what attracted me to UCSD. So through the years, we were able to continue to develop a strong program. I was director of athletics for 24 years, and during that time we won 26 national championships. We won what actually is the NACDA Directors Cup, and at that time it was being sponsored by Sears, and I'm not sure who the sponsor is right now, but the NACDA organization oversees that program. And the Directors Cup is awarded to the programs in their respective division that have the overall greatest success. So I believe it was 1997 when we actually won the Directors Cup, which every other year, to the best of my knowledge, has been won by Williams College in Division III. So it was a major breakthrough when another university won the Directors Cup.
Can you explain a little bit about what the difference is between Division I, Division II, Division III? Not just I think most people think it's just purely the size of the institution, but there's more to it than that.
Size really has nothing to do with the differences in the divisions. It should be based on an athletics and overall university philosophy on how athletics fits into the university. So in all three divisions, you have schools of various sizes. The easiest way probably to differentiate is to talk about the awarding of athletic scholarships. As you know, in Division III, there are no athletic scholarships. In Division I, you can award the greatest number of scholarships per sport. And Division II, you can award athletic scholarships, but not as many as are available in Division I. The philosophy differences, in my opinion, Division III athletics is really a part of the overall university fabric. It's an approach that emphasizes truly the student athlete. On the other end of the spectrum, Division I will claim that their concern is for the student athlete also, and in many instances that's the case. However, many of the student athletes that attend a Division I institution have aspirations of becoming professional athletes. They're not as focused on what their academic career opportunities might be because of their aspirations to become professional athletes. And the reality is a very, very small percentage of student athletes at any level, particularly when you look at the Division I student athletes' dreams, very few go on to become professional athletes. I think the percentage might be less than 2%.
And you think about all that some folks give up on that premise, that they put all their extra time into playing basketball or playing hockey or whatever, instead of studying, when the vast majority of them are not going to wind up, in the NHL or the NBA. And I think that's one of the things that we really should look at, do a little bit better job of explaining to people. Anybody who actually makes it into the NBA was such an unbelievable athlete their whole lives that if you're not one of the top from the very beginning, the chances are pretty good you're not going to be there. But I suppose we can't crush kids' dreams. That's probably not a good thing to do either. Well, let's talk a little bit about your time at the NCAA. As an athletic director, you probably were asked to serve on various committees and that sort of thing. And somehow that wound up with you being the first female secretary-treasurer of the organization. How did that come about?
I really got involved with the NCAA on the ground floor. Some people are surprised when they look at the outstanding athletes, the female student athletes today, that the NCAA really has only been sponsoring championships for women since 1981. A lot of people think that it's been going on since the start of the NCAA, and in fact, it took 75 years before women were welcomed into the NCAA. The NCAA began as an organization in 2006, and in 1906, and women weren't welcomed into it until 1981. And because I was one of the few female directors of athletics over a combined men's and women's program, I was asked to serve on some NCAA committees as women started serving on committees. And one of my early assignments was what was then the Division III Steering Committee, which then led into serving on the NCAA Council. And then I served as vice president for Division III, which was the presiding officer for Division III. And I guess I must have done an okay job, because then I was nominated to serve as secretary-treasurer, which was over all divisions. And 2 years later, I was elected NCAA president, which is very different than what the president's position is today. At the time that I was NCAA president, the hired top executive of the NCAA was the executive director. Today, that individual is known as the president of the NCAA. The structure of the NCAA has changed pretty dramatically over the past 20 to 30 years.
And a lot of that is because of the money that the CBS men's basketball tournament has generated. But you were there when the first big one was being negotiated, isn't that right?
I was a part of the negotiating committee in the late 80s, early 90s that had the first contract that had all those zeros after the first number, and that was the first billion-dollar contract for the men's basketball championship. That was a contract with CBS. Since that time, there's still that long number of zeros, but it's no longer one. It's gone up to $5, $7, $11 billion, which is beyond comprehension.
To me, it's staggering how much money is there, but it's just reflective of how much our society really loves sports, spectator sports, and the original Olympic ideal that of the noble, gentleman athlete. We're a long, long way from that. How has that money changed the NCAA, in your opinion?
Well, there have been a lot of good things that have come with the increased resources, things to help student athletes, things to better support institutions in their efforts to emphasize academic advancement at the Division I level. I think Division II and Division III, the academic question isn't as murky as it is at the Division I level. So Division I now has resources that come from the television contract to help them with academic support of their athletics program. Championships are fully funded by the NCAA at all divisions.
What does that mean exactly?
If an institution is selected to participate in a championship, that institution will have expenses paid for its travel party. Different degrees depending on the divisions, but all three divisions are getting financial help with their championships and with the actual operation of the championship. And that's a real bonus to the student athletes who work so hard all year long to try to qualify for a national championship. And they're made to feel pretty special as a result of the resources that the NCAA makes available. A large percentage of the money that comes from the basketball contracts goes back to member institutions in some form or other. And at the Division I level, a very large percentage of it goes directly back to conferences and individual institutions.
So what's happening for the conferences, Division I conferences like the Big Ten and the ACC, et cetera, is very different than what's happening for the Division III conferences, for example.
Yeah, just a tad bit.
I think there's this perception that because there's so much money in Division I athletics that must be true for Division III. And having been around it here for many years, these folks are giving up a lot to participate in it, and it's because they love to do it.
Exactly.
And yet, Monday morning, their professor wants them in the classroom, and you got to take that math test just like everybody else. You're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. Joining us is Judy Sweet, and we're talking about the NCAA and gender equity initiatives. Well, let's talk about gender equity initiatives. When you started, as you mentioned before, there wasn't a place at the NCAA table for women. There was another conference or another organization, right? And tell us a little about that.
In the early 70s, after Title IX became law, and that really changed the whole world of athletics in respect to opportunities for women. But it's important to note that Title IX, which is a part of the Education Amendments Act, isn't just about athletics. It's about providing opportunities in education on a gender equitable basis. And in fact, it's because of Title IX that medical schools and law schools changed from maybe having 5% of their enrollees that were female to, in this day and age, 50% or greater that are women that are attending the professional schools that previously may not have been available to them. And that's what's happened with athletics as well. Prior to Title IX, there really wasn't much motivation on the part of schools to provide opportunities for girls and women, but when Title IX became law, basically said whatever opportunities are being made available for one gender should be available for the other gender in all areas of education. Athletics has probably been the slowest in complying with the law. So in respect to what happened initially, there was an organization that was formed called the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, AIAW, in the early 70s that began sponsoring national competitions for women. And that organization did a remarkable job of advancing women's athletics. In the late 70s, as programs were recognizing that there were two sets of rules, one for men, one for women, under two different organizations, it became more complicated to administer, where you had to follow two sets of rules, and the resources that were available through the AIAW were not as great as the resources that the NCAA were willing to make available to athletics programs. And as a result of that, in 1981, the NCAA started sponsoring championships for women. And it was, I believe, 1 or 2 years after that, that unfortunately there was no way for the AIAW to continue to keep its doors open, since a lot of institutions made the decision that they wanted both their men's and women's athletics programs under one organization. And it was in 1981 that the NCAA started sponsoring championships for women.
So you think that obviously Title IX has been a success. What else do we still need to do? I mean, do you think that women really do have achieved gender equity at the collegiate level, or is there more that we need to be doing?
There's more that we need to be doing. We have made dramatic improvements, but when you look at the statistics, there are a couple of things that jump out at me and others. Here we are. Next year we're going to be celebrating the 40th anniversary of Title IX, and women are still only receiving 42% of the participation opportunities. And it's a similar percentage at the high school level. In terms of resources, women and girls are receiving 33 to 37% of the resources that are made available. And when you look at recruiting dollars, it's about 32% of the recruiting dollars that are going toward women's programs. Another alarming piece to me is that as a result of the better resources going into women's athletics, there's been a decrease in the number of women that are being hired as head coaches of women's teams. And in fact, a colleague of mine and I have recently founded a new organization which is called the Alliance of Women Coaches to try to reverse that trend. We have gone from 90% of women's teams being coached by women in 1972 to 42% of women's teams with head coaches in this day and age. That's something we need to pay attention to.
In fact, I teach a couple of sports econ classes here, and the research that I've seen indicates that the more prestigious the women's program is, the more likely it is to have a male head coach.
Yeah.
So it's the ones that are really working on a shoestring, et cetera, that really struggle with that. The argument that others make on the other side is that, well, it's football, right? That the reason why you get those numbers is because of this giant program out there that's football. And the other argument that they make is that, well, football and men's basketball are revenue sports, and women's sports, as of yet, don't generate the same kind of revenue, and that's why that's the case. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, almost every sport is revenue generating. It's true that football and basketball may bring in, and probably do, bring in greater revenue than most other sports. That's true for men's sports as well as women's sports. However, revenue producing doesn't necessarily mean profit producing. And when you look at the number of programs that have a bottom line that is not red, there aren't very many of those, maybe 20 in the whole country that actually are profit producing. But the really important part of that people don't understand is that revenue has nothing to do with providing equitable opportunity for male and female student athletes. And Title IX is very clear about that. Doesn't matter where the money comes from, you have to treat your male and female student athletes equitably.
One of the things I think that a lot of people don't know is when athletic departments count up what their revenues are, they include the money that the institution gives to them to run the program. So, oh yeah, we're in the black. Well, not really. You made $200,000, but the institution gave you $1 million.
Right.
And there's a lot of good data that's available on the web. The Department of Education keeps track of that, but it's hard to read unless you really know what's going on with that. Let me talk a little bit about you've had a lifetime in athletics at the college level. And is it really, it's always different now, right? I mean, if we go 40 years in the future, we're going to say it's different then than it is now. In your opinion, what, other than the women's athletics being, more prominent than it was before, what else is different about athletics, college athletics in particular, now than it was when you first got into the racket? As a badminton person, I suppose I should apologize for that pun.
Okay, accepted. It astounds me how much money is going into athletics. What coaches' salaries are at the Division I level. We had exciting athletic competition when we were paying coaches $100,000 a year, and now we're paying them $5 million a year.
It's incredible.
I constantly shake my head and say, how can we continue to do this? And I've been shaking my head for 20 plus years. When I was NCAA president, I believe that a high-end budget at that time was the University of Michigan. Their budget was about $30 million. High-end budget today, $140 million. Not at Michigan, but wow. You can probably figure out what schools might be at that level. How can we continue to sustain that level of expenditure? Coaches' salaries, the facilities arm race, everyone has to have more elaborate facilities than their competitors. I remember hearing one story where an institution was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to put night lights on their practice field. What's really bizarre about that is they never practiced at night. And so when they were asked, why would you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to put these lights on a practice field that you don't even practice on at night? The answer was, we need to do that because our competitors are doing that. So they had to show their recruits that here's our practice field, we have night lights, so we can practice at night, even though we don't do it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College. If your university can win in basketball or football or hockey, then there's going to be a market for a coach that can make that happen. Unfortunately, that also brings in a different element where the sporting ethic is not necessarily there.